Hello, mentors. Welcome to our podcast series, Mentorships in Education, brought to you by Just Education at justeducationfirst.com. I am your host, Judith Epstein. I am very excited about the wide range of experts who have volunteered to give up their time and expertise. They will share their innovative ideas, their exciting perspectives, their rich resources, and their research with us. Please continue to delve into these topics on their websites and with your legal counsel, healthcare provider, and education professional. Our guests will have information that will be relevant to mentors supporting struggling students, parents, teachers, administrators, legal support, and health professionals. We will address all levels of education with issues that affect academic performance. Our goal is to open discussions and introduce a variety of approaches to those searching for information in a free venue. So, mentors, let me introduce our guests for today. Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 44 of Mentorships in Education, brought to you by justeducationfirst.com. I am very honored with all of the numbers of connections requests I've been getting lately and offers to be on the podcast. I want to thank you so much. Please know that I'm old and I move slowly. I will get through them all, but it's going to take me a little bit of time because I want to give everybody the attention that they need. So if you would be willing to be patient with me, I'm not ignoring you. Thank you so much. My goal, as I have tried to explain, is to create a resource of information, a free resource of information, and fill a void that I found existed when I was teaching many years ago for a library for people who are trying to find some direction, support for their kids, whether they're parents, teachers, other mentors of students. A lot of people can't afford to pay, and so many people have been so gracious with their time. I am so grateful for this library that we're beginning to develop. So let me begin by saying, while we hope to be there for our children, regardless of their age, for many more years, we hope, the fact is that we're not going to be there forever. And it's fair to not fair, I should say, to expect other family members to assume the financial or daily oversight of a special needs individual. It doesn't take oodles of money to do this, but what it does take is preparation with support. And what we're going to be doing today is speaking to attorney Annette Hines, who specializes in just this kind of advice. And she's a marvelous resource, as you're going to find out, with so many avenues to reach her and access information that she's made available to the public. So thank you, Annette, for being with us. I thank you so much for all the time you've given me. It's really been a pleasure to speak with you. You're full of so much enthusiasm, and people can't see your smile, but it just radiates. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judy, for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
Thank you. I think I would like to start with some information about Annette. And I will say that there is a tab, as I always have on the podcast, where you can read more about our guests, because I don't have time to go into all of the activities that our guests have been in. And certainly Annette is not an exception. But I wanted to kind of give you some of the highlights. So she's the founding partner of Special Needs Law Group of Massachusetts, PC, and has been practicing in the areas of special needs, elder law, estate planning for over 20 years. Her clients include individuals and families of children with special needs, the elderly, and others in the community. She received her BA from the University of Vermont, her MBA from Suffolk University, and her JD from Howard University of Law. She brings a very personal experience with her to her work, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But her special needs practice was evolved around her very poignant story, as she is the mother of two daughters, one of whom passed away from mitochondrial disease in November of 2013. And this personal understanding of special needs what has fueled her compassion and dedication to working with people with children of special needs. She published a book in 2019 called Butterflies and Second Chances, which I haven't had the pleasure of reading the whole thing, but I have read excerpts from it. And it is an amazing accounting, and it flew to one of the top bestsellers in Amazon. So I guess that's even a better recommendation than what I have to say. In 2021, Annette received the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys Teresa Award by the Teresa Foundation in recognition of her outstanding efforts in advocacy for individuals with special needs. And I just want to mention one more thing. There's so many other things that you can check on, but one more thing, that in 2016, the top women of law from Massachusetts, Lawyers Weekly, designated her a super lawyer every year beginning in 2014. And that's I hope I said that right. That's quite a footnote, if you will, to give her some credibility in the work that she's doing. So let me start a little bit. I think our listeners would like to know what your story is, since I've kind of given you a foundation here for some of your work, and I think they'd like to know about it, and I certainly would like to understand that a little bit more.
Thank God they can't see me blushing right now.
Oh,
all the
that's
things
okay.
that my mother cares about.
That's okay. You're entitled. Please talk a little bit about your experience with your daughter, with I guess the segue of your plans to be a lawyer and how they evolved into the direction that you've taken. And I do have some questions as we go along, but I'd like you to kind of lay it out a little bit, please.
Well, I always wanted to be a lawyer. I know not everybody can say that, but since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, I always wanted to practice law. And I always wanted to be a civil rights attorney, which is why I went to Howard University. It's a historically Black college, and I went to make a difference. And I thought I would be doing something with criminal justice, something for women and children, and came out and very quickly was married immediately, and basically had my first daughter within the first year of my marriage, and she was born a 29-week 2-pound preemie. So immediately I was thrown into the world of healthcare and disability issues. We found out 2 years later that she had something called mitochondrial disease, but we were, I like to say that Elizabeth burst into the world. She just burst onto the scene, but the day that Elizabeth was born, an advocate was born right along with her, and that was me. So
what a great analogy. I put a great link there. Yes.
So that's what happened. It was not that simple, of course. We were on a long journey together, entwined together in this very strange odyssey. And 4 years later, my second daughter, Caroline, was born, and she has no super special needs, but she is afflicted with all the things that a sibling of a very profoundly disabled child, would have. And she's got anxiety. She has a lot of PTSD from losing her sister at age 13 and being in and out of the hospital all the time. And so, my journey is not very straightforward. It's quite the crooked line, but that's where I started on my path to being an advocate and a disability attorney and a civil rights attorney.
That's quite a story. And I know the book that you wrote is based on your journey with your experiences with your daughter. I hope people will look for the book, but can you talk a little bit to what the purpose was of the book and maybe give us an overview about it?
Sure. So I started writing the book just as a journal for myself. It didn't start out to be a book for everybody. And I needed to write it because I was very angry after my daughter passed away. I was really angry when my daughter was born too. I spent a lot of time being angry, actually.
That's funny you say that because I have written down in my notes, were you angry? I wanted to ask you about that. It's interesting that
Yes.
you brought that
And
up.
and I laugh a lot. A lot of people that know me would say, I can't picture you that way, because I do laugh a
Yeah.
lot. And we laugh a lot in our practice here, but I did spend a lot of time being angry, and I still
Uh,
get angry a lot now because things are so unfair and unjust in our world. But I was angry that this child was born to me when I had done everything I was supposed to do, and I was not supposed to get this child. Somebody else was supposed to get this child. So, but here she was, and here we were. And then, after I fought like heck to give her this best life possible, and I was just the best mom I could be, she up and died on me. And then I was angry again. So, I really went into a hole after that for a while. And I wasn't going to any traditional group. I wasn't going to any psychologist. Now, I'm not saying that that's not the right path for other
right,
people. The
right,
main point of my book is that grief is not one size fits all.
right.
And, there are a lot of great books out there on grief, and mine is not a happy book. Mine is not
Mm,
oh, everything is, flowers and candy and everything's going to be okay book. But it is a book where a third of the book is about what happens after, because it's important to talk about after.
mhm.
And the after for me was really gritty and tough. And the most important thing that I want people to know is that I lost my identity. I didn't know who I was going to be anymore. If I wasn't Elizabeth's mother, was I still an advocate? Was I still a special needs / disability attorney? Was I even going to want to do this work anymore? Who was I?
You kind of lost your community
I was a
almost.
mother
You
without a
didn't really
family.
belong anywhere. Yeah.
Absolutely. Do I still belong in this world without a special needs child? How do I relate to people anymore? Am I still one of you? I never belonged to the non special needs families community.
Right.
And so I never related there. So now I have no foot in anybody's country. And that has been so bizarre land for me. And it was hard to fight back. So I started writing things down, which is not in my nature, to be honest with you, because I'm dyslexic. So I don't like to write.
Oh, interesting.
So,
Okay.
yeah. And I have, ADD. So, sitting down to do anything for a short period of time is really hard for me. But the writing helped. And when I first started writing, it was pretty ugly, angry stuff. But eventually things started coming out that needed to come out. And I did join a group that was a good group for me to join. I found my people, and it was a group at Children's Hospital where it was just for loss, for people who had lost children who had been sick. Not every kind of loss, but it was
Oh,
people whose kids had died from illness. Very specific, and it was
right.
very short. It was 10 weeks. So it was a short commitment, which is what I needed. Again, everybody's journey is very individual.
Mm.
And then when I got partway through and I started to look at what I was writing down, I said, this could really be something that could help somebody else. It was really turning into a book. And so I got an editor and I started turning it into a book. It obviously turned into something really good because
you filled a gap there somewhere.
Yeah.
Big need.
Yeah. It sold really well and it's been doing really well.
I have to ask you before we have, as you know, there's a lot of questions I want to ask you more specifically about the legal component of what you do, but I need something came to my mind when I was preparing for this. And I'm just curious what your response is, because often when someone has gone through something as traumatic and painful and such a tragedy as you have been through, you and your family, and then you move on to do so much positive work in the same community, helping so many people. Often we say, look what good has come out of this horrible tragedy. And I'm curious if that gets the back hairs up on your neck where you just like cringe and, like you want to strangle me kind of a feeling, or, how do you respond to that? What is your feeling? Because I went through nothing like that, but I did go through something very traumatic and tragic. And out of that came what I'm doing now. And often people will say to me, well, out of this horrible experience, the good came out of it. And I have to tell you, my response is I'll trade the good. I'd rather not have the bad. That's kind of what I want to say. So I'm just wondering how you feel about that.
I look at it this way. I try not to get too upset at the things people say. But in my experience, humbly, every journey has been something that has been transformative. It's not an either or. It's not like, oh, I went through this and there's been this magical outcome because of it. And if I had not gone through this, I would not have X. So instead, I always I use the metaphor in my book, but I've always used it in my life, which is that I feel like a lot of synergy with the ocean because I grew up near the ocean.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I just feel like I get beat up sometimes when the ocean's really rough, and it just pounds at me. And sometimes the ocean is very calm. But no matter what happens, the ocean is forever changing the shoreline. That is me. And
great analogy. I like that.
It is. And it's always changing me.
Wow.
So I am forever being changed by the ocean that is beating up on me. And sometimes it's very calm, but I always love being in it. The ocean is my life. And so no matter what,
I like that.
I'm always moving with it and I'm always changing. And so I don't think of it as an either or. And so I try really hard to forgive people who say things that are they just want to have something to say
right.
and be in it with you. They're trying to be in it with you. And it's a loving way to try to connect with you. So I try to be calm.
I like that. It's much better than my making a fist and biting my tongue.
Oh, Judi, I didn't always feel that way. I didn't always have peace about it. But as I get older and the gray comes, I do feel better about things.
Oh, well, thank you. I like that. I'm going to quote you on that. I want to get into some of the meat of some of the things that we have discussed before, and I want to notice make our listeners aware of a checklist. You call it the transition checklist that is on a tab. And this is a document that you created to help kind of give people a mnemonic, if you will, of some things they needed to think about if they have a child with special needs. So we're going to be talking about some of these things, and they might want to bring it up or print it out, pause the podcast and print it out so they can make some notes on it as we'll get through as many of the highlights as we can. But if anyone has any more questions, if they want to go into more detail about any of these, I know that Annette would be happy to speak with you about them in more detail. And I also want to make one other comment. Annette is going to be speaking about things that are primarily from the perspective of the state of Massachusetts, I would imagine, although there's some more global issues that you will be referring to. But I think it's important for people to realize that the comments that you're making may raise questions for them. And sometimes the questions, I always say, are more important than the answers. The questions that you're going to be answering maybe from one perspective may give them some direction in doing some due diligence in their own communities to find out how they can support the kids more specifically where they live. So
that's a good point.
Did you want to, I don't know if you want to add anything to that before we get started, but I wanted to make that
clear. When we finish up, we should talk about where people can find resources, because it's so important that that people access the resources that are in their community, because there are so many. And if you have listeners from other states, I'm not sure what your reach is for this.
Oh, yeah, all over the world. So people from many other countries.
So I will be happy to talk to people about, what some good resources are from state to state to state in order to try to, pull in some good resources.
Yes, and we're going to have those links on the tabs. But for those people in other parts of the world who may be addressing the same issues with their children, they may want to find what kinds of resources they have in their own countries and their own communities to address some of these areas of concern that we have. So
try to talk about some global issues without, getting too deep in the legal details, if you will. We can sort of talk in global capacities so people can do their review on a
more personal level with these general. Okay. All right. That's fine. I wasn't sure how you wanted to address it. So that would be great. I'd like to start, and again, using the transition checklist as a guide. Let's talk a little bit about future financial planning for a special needs child. And one of the things I was reading, I think it was somewhere that you wrote that it's important to take into consideration the whole family when doing this planning, that it's important to understand that individual children, siblings, or other family members can't be expected to care for a child with special needs. There have to be some arrangements made. So maybe you can pick up on that and kind of talk about the pros and cons of moving in different directions, whether it's trusts or accounts or executors, or I'm not sure how you want to address it.
Sure. Let me back up for one moment.
Sure.
And say that transition planning from a legal perspective is like a three-legged stool.
Ooh, okay.
So there are three pieces, even though the transition checklist has kind of five main parts. They're really transition planning for everybody has three legal pieces to it. And as Judi mentioned, the first one is really the trust estate planning, the future planning piece of it. And that has to do with all the documents, the assets, the special needs trust component. And that's actually the third piece that really kind of wraps everything together. the first piece, and the one that everybody looks at and usually comes in to talk to the lawyer about, or where a lot of the questions and the crisis kind of bubbles up to the surface really quickly, is the public benefits, which we're going to talk about today too. And that's where people have issues with their school system, where people have issues with payment programs, like here in the United States, Social Security. Here in the United States, it's Medicaid programs. Here in the United States, it's state agencies that pay for programs and supports like day programs and work programs and transportation and housing programs and things like that. And then the third part is all about legal decision making, guardianships, and other supported decision making tools. And there are a number of alternatives to guardianship, meaning somebody legally stepping in with a piece of paper from a judge and from a court to make decisions for you. There are alternatives where somebody may help to support and help you make decisions if you are able to make decisions for yourself, but you just need some informal supports in place, or maybe some semi-formal supports in place. So that's your three-legged stool for transition planning. And if you keep that in mind as you're going around the stool and start to look at what are your person's capacities and what are their lack of capacities. And this transition planning is a long process. It evolves. You're generally starting when your kid's a teenager, and that can be anywhere from 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, all the way up to their mid-20s, because, you are sometimes still having children living at home into their mid to late 20s, and sometimes even longer. And so you're working on things one piece at a time. So as we jump into this future financial planning that we're talking about, building up an estate plan and trusts and asset planning and looking at the whole family as we're looking out into the future, that's one piece of that stool. And we're talking about how are we going to bring in that next generation? How are we going to bring in siblings who not only how are we going to use assets to care for our loved one as we're thinking about that next generation and filling the gaps with public benefits, because we know public benefits aren't going to be there to do everything we need.
Right.
But also, how are we going to fill in the gaps of capacity and capabilities? So we need to do the checklist. We need to go through and kind of systematize and go through process and figure out where some of our gaps lie with our loved one, so that we know what holes we need to plug. And that does evolve over time, because our kids, as they become adults, they're on a different growth trajectory, Judi.
Right.
They don't stop learning and growing just because they turn 18 or 22. They're different. They're growing at a different pace, and they're learning at a different pace. And so we may be looking at a plan that evolves through age 27 or 30. And that's what the future planning piece is when we're looking at an estate plan.
I just want to stop you for 1 minute, because your analogy to a three-legged stool is bringing to my mind the comparison between a three-legged stool and a four-legged stool. A four-legged stool is very secure if one leg is not as strong. It has a strength to it. But a three-legged stool, if one of those legs is not well developed, the stool doesn't support the person.
Yeah.
And what you seem to be describing is a process that needs to be very carefully constructed because it is a three-legged stool and each leg is dependent on the efficacy, if you will, of the other two legs.
Yes. And it's not a one and done.
Right.
It's an evolution, and it's a process.
You keep adding to the legs, so to speak.
You firm them up, and you're doing it together, and hopefully your loved one, your kid, or your sibling, your family member, whoever you're in transition, because sometimes we're doing transition planning for people when they're older too. You are including them. It's a person-centered plan, so you're including them and what their goals are for themselves and what their wishes are for their own life, right?
So, what are some of the questions that you may ask guardians or parents who are putting together the financial component of this leg and trying to decide whether they're going to have an executor, whether they're going to do a trust, whether they're looking for income from other sources? What kind of questions do you ask that would be reflective of parents who are trying to design this particular component of their long-term package for their child? How do you talk to them? What do you say to them?
So first and foremost, we want to take a really good look at their family. So who's in their family? Do they have a really big family? Is their family close? How many kids do they have? Are the siblings close to each other? What kind of disability does their child have? The so-called profound disability, or is somebody, borderline? Do they have really good skills? What are we looking at? What is their trajectory predicted to be? Will they potentially work? Will they live independently? Can we make some projections about what kind of benefits they may or may not qualify for? Those are important things to find out. We're not just asking about the parents' assets, although we do want to know that, because are we planning with $250,000 or are we planning with $25 million? It makes a big difference.
Yes, it does. Yes.
But a lot of times we are planning with a very modest family set of assets. And we will often work with some life insurance because life insurance can provide an estate where people don't have one. And, you have to be able to purchase life insurance, which means you have to be relatively healthy enough to be able to get life insurance. We don't sell life insurance, but most families have a financial advisor in their circle. And if they don't, we'll recommend one or two for them to interview and check out. We don't get any financial benefit for that. We're completely independent, so we don't share fees or anything like that. But a certified public accountant is a very good person to have on your team. And you want to, have this team to be able to, round out your professionals who advise you in, moving forward as you're developing and living out the evolution of your plan, as we've talked about. So, the next thing that we're going to look at, besides what's going on with your family members, what's going on with your siblings, what's going on with your assets, then we're going to start talking about, the future generations. We're going to talk about a special needs trust, because special needs trusts allow us to set aside assets for somebody with a disability, and those assets will not count towards an asset restriction for certain public benefits. That's why we use them. And therefore, you can save for somebody's future to supplement what the government will provide for them.
Let me just ask you a question. If you do this and you're not around as a parent, you're not around when the child is at a place where they need to be able to take advantage of this, someone must be an executor or have the power of attorney to be able to navigate this financial quagmire. Is this is this what attorneys do, or do you recommend that parents choose someone in the family to do this? Do you have recommendations in that respect? Because I would imagine as a parent, I would, knowing that I'm not going to be around for a while, I would want to find someone that I could trust to manage all of this.
That is such a good question. And that is one of the top 3 questions that people ask when they come and see us. So I'm so glad that you asked that. It is right up there. So there are 3 types of people, or 3 types of trustees that you can have for your special needs trust to manage the assets for your disabled loved one. Your family member, a professional, an individual professional like a CPA or an attorney, or an institutional trustee like a bank or a trust company.
Oh, okay.
And, they all have their pros and cons. And so your advisor, your attorney is going to review all of those pros and cons with you. And it's really up to you to decide what makes the most sense for your family. So generally speaking, special needs trusts they're complicated to administer because there are a lot of rules, and you do need to, they are there for the person's lifetime. So they run a long time, and you do need to be thoughtful, not just about tax and trust law, but you also need to worry about disability law, and you need to work with a disabled beneficiary who may or may not have their own challenges that you need to deal with. So somebody may have mental illness, somebody may have challenging behaviors, somebody may have, a guardian, they may be in a group home. There just may be a lot of extra things to deal with besides just understanding how to run a trust in general. And one of the things that you'd mentioned early on in the podcast was, we might not want to burden the other siblings. And we like to come at this with an opt-in situation for siblings, because siblings, they have their own lives, and they will have their own families, they'll have their own careers, and usually they're going to be in their middle-aged years by the time their parents are older and not able to do this, not able to run a trust, and they're usually passed away by the time the trust gets funded. So you don't want to be in your 40s and 50s and in the prime of your life, your kids are going off to college, you're in the prime of your career. You may not be in the same state. You may not be able to do all of these things for your sibling. You may need help with being that circle of support for your sibling. You may already need to be their guardian. Being the trustee may just be over the top for you. So there's a lot to consider. And we will talk about being a trust protector, or being in a role where you get to have oversight, but you don't have to do all the day-to-day stuff. So there's lots of roles that a sibling can play, or another family member can play.
There's so much here, and I want to also, before we end, we do have some time, and I want to talk a little bit about this concept of transition planning as it relates to a child who has some challenges in terms of their being able to live independently, in terms of their being able to be employable, and how do you evaluate that, when they're so young, when you're setting this up? Is this an organic process that you develop as the child gets older, as the answers to those questions become more uh, visual to you? This transition process, I imagine, is one of the big challenges.
Housing and jobs, housing and
Yes,
jobs, housing
yes.
and jobs. That's what's on everybody's mind when they come in. Housing and jobs. And there's a very, very small segment of our disability population that don't have the ability to work, at least at something, have something to occupy them. And unfortunately, the disability population is so underemployed and unemployed at very high rates
Wow.
compared with the general population.
Hmm.
It is quite a shame that that's the case. And we have jobs X, Y, and Z, and we expect everybody with a disability to fit into those jobs,
That could be another whole podcast, right?
Another whole podcast. Housing is a crisis in our country in general, just in the essence of being able to afford housing. And housing, just my opinion, should be a right. Safe, clean housing should be a right for everybody, but unfortunately it's not. And trying to find disability housing for people is so challenging, especially in expensive cities like the Boston area. So I know that in our country in the last year and a half, we've opened up a lot more vouchers. We're trying to get people off the wait list, but it's about a 10 to 12-year wait for a housing.
Oh my
voucher.
gosh.
Yes, in our area. So it varies throughout the country. One of the other issues that the audience must know is that when you get a voucher, you can't always use it where you want to, because the assessment of an apartment in a metropolitan area is usually much lower than what the actual market rent is. So let's say, and these are just made up numbers, but let's say that the market rent is assessed at $750 by HUD in, Somerville, which I hope it's not. So 1-bedroom apartment, $750 in Somerville is what HUD says. But in actuality, you can't find anything for a 1-bedroom apartment for less than $1,200 in Somerville, which means you can't live in Somerville because you can only rent it for what HUD says you can rent it for. So a lot of people don't want to take Section 8 because they have to take it for what the market rent says, what HUD says the market rent is.
Can you, can I, as the parent of a child with a disability, because the waiting list for some things is so long, can I put my child on that waiting list well in advance of when they're going to be ready to take advantage of that? For example, like housing?
As soon as they're 18. Once they're 18 and they're a legal adult, you should get on that list. If you are in Massachusetts, you should check out Autism Housing Pathways. They have a fantastic checklist, a turning 18 checklist to start working on your housing goals. They are amazing, and they do housing consulting. They have all your housing questions answered. Doesn't matter if you have autism or not. Not important.
Oh, okay. That's good. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, not just for people with autism. They just happen to have done a great job of working on all of the housing issues. And it's Kathy Boyle. She's phenomenal. She has just really done an amazing job of bringing together all of the housing issues that people with disabilities face, especially younger people as they are getting ready to go out into the world of housing. So
how do you recommend that parents help to evaluate their child to see what their strengths are, what their where their gap in skills are, to help ready them to go into this workforce? Do you guide people and helping to find the resources for them to get this kind of support?
So people should be getting those services in their transition plan at school,
Oh,
especially between ages, say, 15 and 22.
okay.
And they should definitely be doing all kinds of assessments, both formal and informal assessments, vocational assessments. I've seen many, many transition plans, and this is for everybody because this is under IDEA. So it's nationwide. This is not just Massachusetts. You
Oh.
should be under IDEA. You should be getting great assessments done for your vocational ability. And even for very, very challenged and profoundly disabled young adults, there's always something that you can do. Always. You don't need to spend your day staring at the wall. You don't. So, and you can always have choice, voice and choice in how you spend your day and your life.
All right. I have to ask you one more thing that we really haven't talked about, but a, a lot of questions that I get are in relationship to, how do I talk to the school? How do I talk to the teacher? I don't want to make it more difficult for my child by, being aggressive, but I also want my child to have certain supports. Uh, what can I do to be more effective as an advocate for my child? So if I was to come to you as a parent and I was to say, look, I'm not trying to create a problem for my school district. I'm not trying to get get a lawyer involved. Can you give me some advice on how I can be a better advocate for my child?
Yeah. So usually, look, most of the time I don't do school cases. And that's because bringing a lawyer in usually doesn't help. I'll be
Right.
honest with that. It just gets everybody's hackles up. And then they have
Exactly.
to bring their lawyer in. And it just stops progress. And I hate that that's the case, but it's just the truth about the matter. I think the best thing that parents can do is get educated. So there are so many classes. So if you're here in Massachusetts, your best bet is to go to absolutely everything that the Federation for Children with Special Needs has. They are your number one, first and only stop for every educational event that you can have. They have a 1-800 number. You can get an advocate with a sliding scale for whatever you can afford to pay. You can, there's something called Rights Law, WRIGHT. They have a lot of good materials. They, whether you think they're expensive or not, I guess is what, depends on what you think is expensive.
Right.
But they have amazing materials for people throughout the country that talks about IDEA. I think that there are other training materials everywhere. Every state has some place like the Federation that is set up as your parent training and information center. So you have to figure out what your parent training and information center is in your state that is funded by your Department of Education. And go to those trainings. Most of them are free or extremely low cost. And you want to make sure that you understand what your rights are and what the law is in your state. And then you can advocate for yourself. Know what you can ask for. Know when you can ask for evaluations to be paid for. Know what your timelines are. Know what to fight for and what not to fight for. Don't give your school district a hard time when you're in the middle of a pandemic and everybody's having a hard time. But do give your school district a hard time when, your kid's getting nothing.
You have to pick and choose your battles.
You do.
Right.
When you are in your last few years and you're in those really important transition years, it is really critical that you get those vocational evaluations, that you get to try your kid at different jobs, that you get the benefit of, if they want to go to college or try different, classes that would lead them there, that you get the benefit of those experiences. The time goes by so fast. And one thing I know about school districts, they drag their feet on everything. Nothing gets done. And before you know it, you blink and your kid's 21 and it's over. And you just don't get that kind of service when your kid's an adult. Nothing is mandated. Everything is, if the budget's there, it's nice to have. You don't get that kind of service in adult service programs. So you need to get that all in there before your kid turns 22.
Thank you so much for being with us. I hope that our listeners will print out this transition checklist. I hope that they will use it as a guide to get more information about what they can do to plan their child's future, and to be in touch with their schools and get the support and services that their child not only needs, but is entitled to. And please reach out to Annette if you have any questions. I hope you will look for her wonderful book on Amazon, Butterflies and Second Chances. Is that correct? Butterflies and Second Chances.
Thank you.
It is. It's definitely worth reading. As I say, I've read parts of it, but I haven't read the whole thing. But it's just beautiful, very poignant. Thank you all for being with us today. I hope that you will continue to be part of our community and look for the resources that we have coming down the road. Lots of people are offering to be a resource to the education community and supporting all of our struggling students. And that can mean that children who are gifted and children who are typical, and children that have neurodiversity. Everyone struggles in their own way. And we need to recognize that our kids are not coming into school looking to be difficult. If they are having a problem, it's up to us to find the resources to support them. Be safe, everybody, and stay connected with me and with each other. Thank you. Thank you, mentors, for being with us today. If you found this podcast of value, please visit justeducationfirst.com to subscribe to our blog and Mentorship and Education podcast, so that you may continue the exploration with us. Our goal is to provide a free treasury of information for our listeners, so they can become acquainted with the amazing resources that we have available to us. We want to thank all of our guests for giving their time and sharing their wealth of information with us. Please also visit their websites and explore more of their resources to further your pursuit of the topic. Hope to hear from you at justeducationfirst.com. Have a good week, and thank you.